Welcome everybody to our final and third and final mental wellness series event. Mindy, could you go to the next slide for now? Thank you. While everybody's joining us, I just want to extend thank you for taking the time out of your day to come and discuss this important topic and learn about it with us at NCUE. Welcome to Beyond Tolerance, Overcoming Barriers to Care for LGBTQ and Two-Spirit Youth During COVID Lockdown. As I just said, this is our third and final webinar in our first Mental Wellness Community of Learning series here at NCUE. So we have two previous webinars that are recorded and available on our website at the address listed below on this slide. So if you're unable to attend those previous webinars, please feel free to access those and the recordings and their associated slides there. The series is focused on providing ways to support and enhance the mental wellness of our youth and young adult Native community members, especially during these difficult times. Can we go to the next slide? I know people are still joining, so thank you as we progress through our housekeeping today. As a quick introduction, my name is Emily Baer. I'm a recent MPH grad with a specialism in epidemiology, and I currently serve as a public health associate in the technical assistance division here at NCUE. I'm one of NCUE's more recent additions, but very excited to join the team here and excited to welcome you all today. Next slide. Many of you are probably familiar with NCUE and our mission already. We are the National Council of Urban Indian Health, and we are the leading national nonprofit organization devoted to the support and development of quality, accessible, and culturally competent health and public health services for American Indians and Alaska Natives living in urban areas. We're the only national representative of the 41 Title V urban Indian organizations, or you might see also the acronym UIOs, under the Indian Health Service, or IHS, in the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act. Here at NCUE, we strive to improve the health of the over 70% of the American Indian and Alaska Native population that lives in urban areas, supported by these quality, accessible healthcare centers. Next slide. Attached to your email for the event today, you can find the agenda, and you can also see it here just as a brief overview. We'll be spending the first few minutes just doing general housekeeping, going over Zoom etiquette and some instructions for use in case you're not as familiar with this virtual platform. And then we'll be going over the introduction of our awesome presenters today before I hand over the reins to the presenters, and they will carry on with their presentation, their panelist discussion, and it will be followed by a brief Q&A before we adjourn. Next slide. For some of these general housekeeping guidelines, this webinar is being recorded and all mics are muted as you join us, unless otherwise directed. For example, if you are wanting to ask a question, you can, during our Q&A session, you can feel free to unmute if you're more comfortable doing that. Please turn your camera on. It does help us interact with the audience as part of this community of learning that we came together for today. This will be a 1-hour session, and following this, there will be a survey that we would welcome your feedback on, and I will drop that link as the session goes on. The questions can be typed into the chat box, and we'll have instructions following this. And after this event, you can look forward to the slides and recording that will be available. We'll also be sharing any resources mentioned, so that will be provided after. Next slide. Here are some instructions for using Zoom, in case, like if you are not as used to this format, for example. And we do encourage you to type your questions or comments into the chat box as we go along. We will be monitoring it. So to ask a question or a comment, just select chat at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There's a button in the center of the black toolbar at the bottom, and then type your question or comment into the chat box and hit enter, and that will appear on the right. Next slide. So we wanted to give everybody an opportunity to try that out now, and also to kind of introduce ourselves to this discussion, to get to know each other a little bit better. We encourage you to please drop your name, tribal affiliation if applicable, pronouns if you prefer to use them, and your organization if it's applicable, and position. So I'll give everybody a minute to do that. Thank you. Next slide. As we're introducing ourselves, just quick instructions on answering the polling questions that we will be facilitating during this event. We ask that you complete them if you're comfortable doing so, and it's pretty simple process. You pretty much just select your answer. As you can see, there will be one option for each question, and once you've answered all the questions, you can select submit at the bottom of the poll, and we will take your results, and we'll be able to display them after the polling is completed. Thank you everyone for introducing yourself, and it's great to see everyone from so many different places joining us today. So we are going to have some polling questions now. They're going to appear on your screen, and if you would like to complete them, we appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time to complete the poll, and consider these questions as we get started. And it kind of gives us a nice place and introduction so that we know where we are coming from when we enter this discussion. The poll is going to be displayed, the polling results will be displayed on your screen so we can all see them. And it does look like we have a mix of results, and that a majority of respondents feel that their site is not necessarily Two-Spirit and LGBTQ plus Native affirming, although many do feel that it is. And it's the results as far as Two-Spirit history. Talking about Two-Spirit history in our programming, it looks like 43% say yes, but by that same measure, 15% say no, and many are not sure. And Two-Spirit or LGBTQ plus Natives on staff, the board of the Youth Council, similar results, about 50-50, either yes or not sure. And as far as attempting to engage with Two-Spirit or LGBTQ plus Native youth during the pandemic, it is encouraging to see that a majority of 73% of respondents have engaged in this outreach. So we will thank you for sharing your responses with us. And we will move on to the next slide. So as a quick introduction to our presenters today, I'm very excited and grateful to them for joining us. I wanted to extend particular thanks to Tavi. They've been instrumental in organizing this alongside Nikui, and I appreciate their expertise. They are an Eastern Band Cherokee Indian descendant and contract therapist with Native American Lifelines in Baltimore, Maryland. Tavi provides training to Native American Lifeline staff and board members on creating affirming two-spirit spaces and programs. And they co-founded a nonprofit summer camp in North Carolina for LGBTQ+ youth in 2012 that continues today. Tavi owns a group therapy and training practice and authored Cultural Awareness and Therapy with Trans and Gender Non-Conforming Adults and Older People. Thank you for presenting today, Tavi. Lenny Hayes is a citizen of the Sisseton-Wahpeton Oyate, apologies, of the northeast corner of South Dakota. Lenny owns Tate Topa Consulting and currently is in private practice specializing in marriage family therapy. Lenny has extensive training in mental and chemical health issues that impact the Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ and Native community, and currently serves with Sovereign Bodies Institute as their missing and murdered Two-Spirit project assistant. Welcome, Lenny, and welcome Shane Ortega, who is a consultant speaker for Native Black equity, sovereignty, disabled veterans, and LGBTQ+ equity. Shane is a member of the Tuscarora tribe and enrolled SKN, Eastern Band Cherokee. And finally, we're excited to welcome Somáh Haaland. They're an interdisciplinary artist from the Pueblos of Laguna and Jemez. Although their heart belongs to the desert, they say they currently reside in Brooklyn, New York, and are learning about life on the East Coast. Somáh got their degree in theater arts from the University of New Mexico, where they pursued their love of movement and storytelling that was instilled in them at a young age. It is important to Somáh that they use their privilege to uplift the voices of marginalized communities. She loves collaborating with children to make theater, and she is passionate about empowering youth to make art as a form of resistance. So welcome to all of our presenters. Thank you for joining us today. And without further ado, I will hand it over to Tavi to begin our presentation.
Thank you, Emily, and to Nikui for wanting to bring this topic up for all of us to talk about today. I want to just ask my ancestors to help me speak in a good way, and to ask any elders here, if you hear me say anything that's not correct today, feel free to unmute yourself and correct me. And also, if you hear me mispronounce something in your language, please also feel free to unmute and correct me on that too. And I want to say, Shki, thank you to my relatives who have agreed to give their time today to share their experiences and their knowledge with all of us too. So I'll introduce myself. Shio, Tavi, Dawadoa, Chi Chalagi. Hello, my name's Tavi. I'm Cherokee, like Emily said, Eastern Band descendant, and I'm happy to put forth some of these things and also to bring up a lot of questions for us to talk about today, because I know that we're all dealing with a lot of challenges right now in the pandemic and trying to figure out the best ways to support our folks. So next. So the one place I want us to really all start from is the understanding and the knowledge that two spirits have always been here. This drawing I like because it's from 1876, and it's a drawing of a victory dance celebrating Custer's defeat. And it shows here Cheyenne He Emaneo. So a gender in the Cheyenne tribe is depicted here again from this drawing from 1876. And we have recorded knowledge of at least 150 tribes, stories of two spirits and of multiple genders throughout time. But just because we don't have something recorded, or we don't even have some oral history that's been passed down in other tribes, I also want us to understand that that doesn't mean that that two spirits didn't exist in all tribes. There, you know, it was a really intentional and specific plan to try to erase history and knowledge of two spirits and erase two spirits from existence entirely. And so we need to be able to understand that in recognizing why sometimes we may not have tribal specific words anymore that we remember, or stories or knowledge of specific sacred roles or ceremonial roles and responsibilities. But that, again, that doesn't mean that the answer is not just, well, then you weren't traditional to our tribe. And that's something that comes up a lot and that you'll hear people say. And so I want to just encourage all of us to be able to have that conversation about why that might be. Next. If you know something about Lozen, can you type that into the chat? Have you ever heard of this person? Yes, and I see hearts. I really love the story of Lozen, Chiricahua Apache, who wanted to set out on the warrior's path at a young age. And at the age of 7, learned to ride and became one of the best riders in the community. Lozen was a powerful medicine person, and it was discovered that Lozen had a gift to spot enemies from a really, really far distance, and also to be able to heal wounds. And Lozen also wore traditional men's clothing and lived and fought with the men, and was said to be the best with a rifle, the best knife skills, the best runner, and because of all of these gifts was called a shield to the people. And Lozen joined Geronimo's band along with a woman warrior named Tadotse. And Tadotse had a husband, but it was also said that Lozen and Tadotse were together when they were in Geronimo's band together. And they were able to hold off attacks from settlers for about 3 years. And then they ended up getting imprisoned when Geronimo was captured in 1886. And they were imprisoned in Florida, and then they were moved later on to prison in Alabama. And Lozen died in prison of tuberculosis. And so this is one of our ancestors that we do have stories about and we know about. Okay, next. So as we all know, there were many different projects, colonization projects, and after removal from tribal homelands came the boarding school projects with the goal of, killing the Indian to save the man. And so this was a policy of forced assimilation. A lot of Christian denominations participated in it through mission boarding schools. And it was believed that, by civilizing us, they would save our souls. And so some children were forcibly taken, really kidnapped from their families and placed in boarding schools. And then other people were told, if you want your kids to be able to live in this new white world and learn English and these things, then you need to send them to one of the boarding schools. Residential school survivors have told consistent stories of really extreme physical and emotional abuse. And so not only, were people taught to be ashamed of being Native, but there was especially an intention around taking identity away from Two-Spirits in the boarding schools. And a lot of Two-Spirits had to go into hiding to try to not be detected when they were in the schools, and tried to blend in so they wouldn't be singled out for even more extreme punishment. And one of my elders, Judy Tallwing, has shared stories with me about her time in a residential school. And the nuns would call her lesbian. And that was a word she hadn't even heard before she was placed in the school. And so they were using that as a negative word to her. And they would even put her in solitary confinement, sometimes for months, even when she was only 12 years old. Because they were trying to erase that part of herself and who she was. And it did not work. So if you have a chance to hear more stories about her and her life, you will see why. Okay, next. So colonizers were really stressed out by coming upon Two-Spirit, Indigenous, and Native peoples. They had condemned homosexuality in their cultures as evil and unholy. And in order for colonization to be successful, they really wanted to do away with fluid gender structures. They wanted to do away with matriarchal leadership in societies because they were trying to set up patriarchal, heterosexual culture and replace our traditional ways. And by doing that, that would help them get power easier. And so I think that's something important for us to also understand as to how we kind of went from our old ways and our old knowledge of multiple genders, of the type of love and sexual freedoms that we had, to how we ended up in some of the ways that we are now. A lot of communities, again, for survival reasons, conformed to these ways. A lot of times there was, again, severe punishment for anybody who didn't conform. And I think it's also important for us to understand things that came with this patriarchal culture that was put onto our people. Things like domestic violence was not traditional to our people. That was something that was imported from Europe. And some of the first recordings of it happened in like the mid 1800s amongst our people. So these are all things, again, that we did not do before that. We had other ways, and we had other ways of being in relationship with each other. And that we really need to understand where those things came from and how they ended up in a lot of times and places now being lived out by our peoples. So Two-Spirits also had to decide, when these things were going on, okay, what am I going to do to survive? Some people, again, ended up trying to go underground and really, hide who they were, blend in so that they could survive. And then a lot of Two-Spirits ended up dying of suicide to avoid having to change who they were. Okay, next. So how has this legacy of colonization affected Two-Spirits and LGBTQ Native folks today? Well, we know that Natives in general have twice the suicide rate of any group on Turtle Island, and over half of Two-Spirits have attempted suicide at least once in life. And that statistic actually gets decreased if the tribe the person's affiliated with, and the person has a connection to tribal communities that are affirming of Two Spirits and that have retained some of their cultural knowledge and traditions around the genders and roles of Two Spirits in that tribe. So we can see a direct connection there of ways to decrease the suicide rate. Two Spirits have high rates of HIV infection, and with the highest rates being among mixed race Two Spirits. And that's also concerning when you know that Two Spirits, at least half, have had negative experiences with healthcare providers. So when you have a condition where you need regular healthcare, but you're hearing racial slurs, you're hearing negative things about your identities, or healthcare providers are flat out saying, we don't work with people like you, that makes it really, really difficult. There are high rates of intimate partner violence. 65% of Two Spirits have been sexually assaulted. And there's also high rates of alcoholism and substance dependence. There's high rates of poverty, 41%, and homelessness, 57%. And I know that I think your last meeting was talking about homelessness and Native youth. And so there's a high correlation with Two Spirit and LGBTQ Native youth and homelessness. And in the National Transgender Survey that this was taken from, that was almost twice the rate of the general transgender population in the United States. So Natives are really disproportionately affected in these ways. And then of Two Spirits who came out to family, 38% of family stopped speaking to and seeing the person. And that was compared to 26% of the general population in the transgender national survey. Next. According to a GLSEN study, which was called Erasure and Resilience on Native Youth in 2020, 98.3% of Native and Indigenous LGBTQ students heard the word gay used in a negative way. And about 3/4 of them said, we hear this all the time. 2/3 of the students felt unsafe at school because of their sexual orientation or their gender identity. 93% heard remarks about people not acting masculine enough or not being man enough. 93% heard racist remarks. And the majority of the students that responded reported being depressed. Compared to the students that didn't have a student support group, an LGBTQ support group they were able to be part of, the students who did have that were less likely to miss school because of feeling unsafe. And that was 39% compared to 47%. And they felt greater, just a sense of belonging in general. And so from that recent study that we have of our Native youth, we can see the importance of people having spaces to come together, to be together, to share experiences, and to have a place to be able to do that. Next. So what are some other challenges just in general that Two Spirit and LGBTQ natives experience? Disconnection from culture a lot of times. And there's a term that is, I think Jolivet came up with this term, post-traumatic invasion syndrome. But about the trauma of being disconnected from culture and how the effects that that has on you and the effects that that can have through generations. And there's a lot of reasons why we might be disconnected from culture. If you have family rejection and your family's connected to culture, that's usually going to have a wider spread impact for you. Or maybe your immediate family wasn't connected to culture and it kind of distanced themselves. And so you didn't grow up connected to tribe or connected to culture. And then being Two-Spirit, you may feel that's even harder for me to figure out than how do I reconnect? There's all these other barriers. I don't know if I'll be accepted within my tribe. I don't know what my roles might be, or if I'm even wanted, to be able to come around. There's also a lot of pain, shame, stigma, and isolation. And again, when people have had these experiences throughout history over time, when you're told that you're shameful and you're told that you're evil or you're, unholy or bad or all these things, eventually that sinks in some ways, as eventually you absorb that message in some ways. And especially when a lot of your people have absorbed that message and are, reflecting it back to you. And then, so a lot of times I've talked to so many LGBTQ natives who said, I didn't think I could be both native and queer. I thought I had to pick one. And I didn't really feel like I could, change who I was attracted to or in relationship with or what my gender was. And so I tried to just kind of immerse myself into queer community, but then natives are invisibilized in a lot of those spaces and aren't recognized, aren't included, aren't acknowledged. And so it feels like, you're always kind of on the outside of any community that you're part of or that you're in. Um, Other challenges are not being able to learn or hold traditional sacred roles. And there still being today a lot of really colonized views of gender within tribal communities. So I think it's ironic that in some tribes, traditionally, the Two Spirits were the ones who chose the pole for Sundance Lodge. But I just read a story from a Two-Spirit elder, Beverly Little Thunder, who had the experience of being really involved at Sundance and then being told as she came out as Two-Spirit, being told people like you should just be taken out into the desert and shot and left there, and you're not welcome to be part of our community here anymore. So just seeing the total difference between, the original role and then being told today, you can't even be here. We don't want you. And in fact, we don't even think you should be alive. I know of folks who have been told, you can't sit at the drum. We don't want you to be part of that. Um, a lot of different roles or knowledge people might be willing to have or be wanting to learn to have or have been told you can't do this. And then that's all combined with just what all Native peoples can experience is just generational and ancestral trauma. Knowing what our peoples have been through, knowing the effects, still seeing day-to-day reminders and still our people being traumatized and oppressed. That's kind of just magnified when there's all these also conflicts around where do I fit, where's my place. Two Spirits also face higher rates of violence and murder. And so whenever we talk about missing and murdered Indigenous women, I hope that we also lift up Two Spirits. A lot of times when we hear of murders, we also, depending on who's telling the story of that person's death, we may not hear that they are Two-Spirit. We may not hear that they were LGBTQ, depending again on who's sharing that information out. And so we do lose a lot of our folks in different ways. And sometimes that piece of knowledge about who they were isn't, shared out. And then it's also harder for Two-Spirit and LGBTQ natives to find affirming and knowledgeable providers, whether that's medical care, whether it's mental health care, whether it's spiritual guidance. a lot of times, people just don't really know or have the background to work appropriately with our people. Next. So some extra challenges that I'm sure a lot of us know about now during the pandemic is a sense of isolation. So even though we were, the folks on the panel and I were talking about this a little bit yesterday, that even though in some ways being able to be online and be virtual can give people more access to groups or events that they might not have been able to go to before, it also can make it hard for a young person who might be at home with family who's not supportive. And they might be worried that, my family is going to be able to hear the things I'm talking about and I don't have privacy, or my family's going to look at my computer history and see that I went onto this site and I saw this information. And so I think the sense of isolation has in some ways really increased, and especially if people aren't at school and maybe school was where they had their support, and they're doing school online now, that's one other layer of support that's been taken away. Being at home with unsupportive family might mean you're hearing a lot more negative comments about yourself. It might mean that you can't freely express yourself the way that you want to, with maybe the clothes that you wear or anything like that. Maybe again, your access to mental health care or cultural gatherings has been put on hold. And then also, a lot of our tribes have been really, really hard hit, and probably a lot of our urbans, and we have a hard time getting ourselves counted in anything. So, getting the data on that can be hard, but a lot of our families are grieving loved ones right now, who have passed because of COVID. And that just heightens that sense of depression and sadness sometimes. Next. So this slide is just a few ideas of ways that we could support. And then our panelists are going to share some projects that they know of or they're part of for other ideas. But things like texting, calling, sending mail, sending gifts, just to try to keep that young person feeling a connection and knowing that somebody out there is thinking about me and cares about me. Look at your website and ask, if somebody didn't know about our center and they just, were Googling and they came across us, how would they know that we're affirming of Two-Spirits or LGBTQ natives? Because it's a scary thing to approach a place if you don't really know how they're going to receive you. And sometimes people will do it anyway, and then other times people will just try to avoid it altogether. Think about ways to match Two-Spirit elders and youth for mentoring. You could host online Two-Spirit events or make sure that you're sharing out Two-Spirit events that are happening in other places. Hiring Two-Spirit and LGBTQ providers, including Two-Spirits and LGBTQ Native youth on your board or on advisory committees for the center. Making sure you're mentioning Two-Spirits in all your center activities as a way to affirm to the whole community, and to normalize and include these relatives in all of the community activities, not just specific to Two-Spirit things. And then make sure that you have a list of affirming resources locally and online that you can offer people to. So thank you all for letting me share that, and I'm going to open it up now to Somáh.
Hi, thank you, Tavi. Goatsi hopa, duhiname tsiakyamai shui mihanu. My name is Somáh, and I am from the Turquoise clan in Laguna, Pueblo, which is in so-called New Mexico. Today, I am joining you from occupied Lenape-Hoking, which is better known as Brooklyn, New York. that was a lot. I just want to take a moment for us all to breathe and internalize all of the information that Tavi just shared with us. It's a lot if you've never heard statistics like that before. So thank you for all that research in your presentation. Yeah. So my great-grandparents met in a boarding school in Santa Fe. And Tavi, I know you touched on how that, you know, that want to connect is made harder. And I know something that I learned in college too was that a lot of folks who were taken to boarding schools, they also, you know, they lost their languages. They lost a lot of the tools that would then help them to connect when they got home. And I know I've heard stories too of people, like, I think the point of it is, it's like when your own people don't accept you, that is just heartbreaking, right? So the thing I want to talk about most, I think, is that sense of belonging. As someone who has struggled kind of feeling like too white to be brown and too brown to be white and kind of existing in that space, I've kind of also felt that way with my gender and my sexuality a lot. I remember growing up on my res and not feeling like I belonged anywhere when it came to traditional practices and ceremonies and things like that. And as I grew up, I kind of lived on and off the res, and I kind of had to learn to code switch in all of these different community spaces. And sorry, kind of gathering my thoughts here. So I think that in order to create that sense of belonging, right, one of the first things that needs to be talked about is just acceptance. I think one of the best examples of this for me is I work with children a lot. Every summer, I work at a children's circus arts camp in Albuquerque, and we have Native kids, we have a lot of mixed race kids, a lot of kids who, you know, speak Spanish as their first language. And every day we come to camp and the kids have a name tag and they get to choose their identity on a daily basis, basically. And I think that I've seen the way that children change and respond when their identity is accepted, even as it changes. And I think that that's something that's important to keep in mind. You know, we are all constantly growing, and I think that the more we learn about ourselves, our expression is going to change as well. You know, coming out to my family as gay was different than coming out to my family as non-binary or two-spirit. And I think that when you have those providing spaces that are affirming gives kids that confidence that they can then go forward and do the things that they want to do. Because although I think that being able to identify as two-spirit or as anything is important, but also what am I trying to say? But I think that showing kids that also is, that label that they choose is also not going to confine them, right? I think that that's something important to talk about as well. And then so I work with an organization called Pueblo Action Alliance in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And when we, sorry, let me see what I'm looking for here. When we were kind of redrafting our mission and vision this year, something that we wanted to make sure we talked about was restoring balance of power among all genders, because the Pueblos where I grew up, they are very split. It is a very, traditionally, it's a very matriarchal society, but I think recently in Pueblo government, in ceremonies and stuff like that, we see a lot of, you know, the cis men taking the lead in those spaces. And I found it interesting that out of all the, you know, I don't normally lead with my sexuality, my gender identity. Like, I don't talk about those things in my other jobs, but I thought it was interesting that when I came back to Albuquerque to work with Pueblo Action Alliance once COVID hit, that was actually the first space that everyone was like, oh, what are your pronouns? I want to affirm your identity so that you can help us do this work. And that was just really eye-opening to me. I know, Tavi, another thing you said is people sometimes feel like they have to choose, can I be a part of this queer community, or can I be a part of the, you know, my Native community? And I felt very grateful that I found a space that provided both. And so when designing our youth program for this upcoming year, that was something that we wanted to make sure we were inclusive about as well. Even in designing our poster, which I can send Emily the links for these, and maybe she can send them out as well. You know, we wanted to make sure the poster was kind of like this gender neutral person, and that it focused on the cultivation of self. So yeah, I think that's, I talked about most of the things I wanted to talk about. So I can pass it.
Shki, Somáh, thank you so much for
Thank you.
sharing. And I really appreciate your words and your vulnerability, because I think you spoke to experiences that a lot of us can relate to, and things to keep in mind, everything from giving people the chance to share new understandings of themselves, even if it's on a day-to-day basis. And then also just even putting thought into like images that are used, because that says something too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that, sorry, and I think the last thing that I remembered I wanted to say is like personally, something that's helped me and something that I've seen help youth is creating spaces for sharing and for art. I know that, you know, not every kid is gonna not everyone identifies as an artist, but I think that everyone has some artist within them. And I think that just simply providing spaces for people to share words, whether it's poems or pictures or anything like that, you know, I think that that's a really valuable form of self-expression, and providing spaces for young people. And especially during a time like this that is so isolating, I think that that can be really valuable. And I think that as Native people too, we know that, you know, in the work that a lot of us are doing, I think we recognize how important intersectionality is. You know, that saying that like none of us are free until all of us are free. And I think that that goes for, you know, queer folks, LGBTQIA, two-spirit folks as well. So just to keep that intersectionality as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Lenny, you're gonna go next, and then Shane.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Somáh, for your words. I am Tukamwanake Luta, which means redstone ghost. My English name is Lenny Hayes, and I'm from the Sisseton-Wahpeton Oyate. I identify as a Winkta, which was the word that was given to me by my people. Second, I will identify as a two-spirit male, and then lastly, I will identify as a gay male. That is my way of decolonizing my own way of thinking and connecting to culture and spirituality. I am a mental and chemical health therapist specializing in marriage family therapy. I do have my own private practice, but I am also a national advocate in regards to violence that's perpetrated on two-spirit people. A lot of my work is based on sex and human trafficking, which is a topic that we don't talk about within our own communities, within our own tribal communities, and really understanding that our young people who identify as two-spirit or Native LGBTQ are impacted by trafficking. And so a lot of my work is just based on educating and bringing awareness to tribal communities about the violence that's perpetrated upon our two-spirit people. So in my background, I'm really well connected with a lot of organizations across the country and going into tribal communities. And a lot of times we tend to really forget about our young people. And so that really, pushes me to advocate harder to get our young people and even our own population to be recognized, because we are we are an underserved population in many, many different areas. And so as part of my work, when COVID started, it also impacted me in the beginning because I knew what was going to be happening. And then as a mental health provider, what I started doing was creating support groups, online support groups, and reminding people that they are not mental health groups, but support groups, not only for adults, but also currently in the last, I would say since October, maybe October, there was a clinic here in Minnesota who wanted to create a two-spirit Native LGBTQ youth support group. And so the thing that they did was they asked me and another individual who identifies female-bodied to be the facilitators of this group. So one of the things I know that that I didn't hear yet is that one of the things that I will tell people is that when we do things for our community, for organizations or others, it should be two-spirit led. Because if it's not two-spirit led, then our young people or our adults who identify aren't going to come. So sometimes we often think that we know what's best for the people, but really, it should be led by two-spirit people because we know what our people need. So I've been a part of these support groups since April. And I plan to keep the support groups going until COVID is over with. Because a lot of our people are suffering right now, being isolated. They're suffering from depression, anxiety. One of the things that we know is that our people are community-based people. And because of this pandemic, we're not able to go out and be in community. We're not able to be a part of ceremony. So one of the things that I've really integrated into my work as a mental health provider is that connection to culture and spirituality, and reminding our Indian people and even our two-spirit people that we have our medicines within ourselves. So we have the ability to help one another through this. So the support groups are going very strong. I'm very grateful and thankful to be a part of that work. But also too, one of the things that I really advocate strongly about is that I attended a webinar early January of last year. One of the things that I was really blown away with is the fact that in this study, what they said was that 51% of gay boys are being trafficked. As part of my question, I asked how much of that is Native. They couldn't answer my question because the proper questions are not being asked. So a lot of our tribal communities are struggling in believing that our Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ community is being impacted by sexual violence and trafficking. So I was stunned because it surpassed girls. In that study, it said 49% of Native girls were being trafficked. Our Native girls were being trafficked, not Native, excuse me, girls in general. But again, that's a population that we really forget about. So that's where a lot of my advocacy work is in regards to making sure that our population is being acknowledged. And also too, as being a research assistant for the Missing Murder for Sovereign Bodies Institute, is helping them to gather data. But I will be honest, there is data of missing and murdered Two-Spirit people. Again, that's a population that we don't talk about, just basically because of the things that happen within our communities. Community members being shunned, being shamed for who they are. And so I really love the fact that Tavi did a lot of education and awareness about Two-Spirit identity, but most of all, really remembering that that we need to remember that there's a lot of tribes across the country who do not connect with the term Two-Spirit. They will connect with their word. So if you remember how I announced myself, I called myself a Winkta first because that was the word that was given to me by my people. And because of colonization, a lot of our tribal communities have forgotten that specific word. One of the things that I also talk about too is that before colonization, we didn't have a word for lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. There was a word, and that was lost because of colonization. The other thing that I talk about, and I'm very respectful to people, is that I don't use pronouns because I believe pronouns is a form of colonization. I know why pronouns was created, but I can honestly say that I don't think that a brown person like me was invited to the table to have a conversation. So again, that is sort of forced upon us. So, and the reason why I say that is because in talking with elders within community, a lot of them get really confused when they're asked to use pronouns. Because I was told by elders here in Minnesota that, yes, we do have a word in our language for male and female, but before colonization, that really wasn't important to us because we treated people with the utmost respect and honor. And when the colonizers did come in, they came in and started murdering our Two-Spirit people. So a lot of those cultural views and cultural ways were lost because of colonization. So one of the things that I find very amazing here in Minnesota is that a lot of the Native people, when they are called upon in identifying who they are, the organization they work with, and which pronouns they use, a lot of the Native people here in Minnesota are actually announcing themselves in their Indian name, which stops the conversation, which I think is really amazing because a lot of them get really confused. And the reason why I say this is because we as Indian people, when we ask people, instead of asking them, do you use pronouns and which ones, we should be really asking our Indian people, if you prefer to use pronouns, which ones? So in a sense, that's why I sort of look at it in my own personal opinion, and I'm not trying to push it on anybody else, but that's the reason why I prefer not to use pronouns. I always tell people, call me by Lenny. If you're going to talk about me in a sentence, it's fine that you use he, him, and his, but I'm not going to announce myself with pronouns. And again, like, I'm very respectful of people who want to use them. I'm not trying to change anybody's idea of it. But again, this is what colonization has done to this population, is forcing us to do things that aren't very familiar to us. And we all have our different ways in our tribal communities and how we view this population, and we need to be respectful in that way. So again, it's very important to remember when we do this work that we allow Two-Spirit people to lead the work, because again, we know what our people need. We don't need people who don't identify or come from a different, area to tell us what we need. So the reason why I created my private practice was because I knew that our Two-Spirit people, Native LGBTQ people, were not properly getting the services here in Minnesota. A A lot of them would not trust non-Native mental health providers because they didn't understand our cultural understandings. So that's one of the reasons why I created my private practice. So I specifically work with youth and adults who identify and families of youth who identify. So I'm very passionate about my work. I've always worked with the Native community here in Minnesota. I've worked with for several tribes, but I'm very passionate about Two-Spirit Native LGBTQ people. So that's what I want to share.
Shki, thank you, Lenny, for sharing that. And if you could also type into the chat in case people would want to send young folks to your support group, like how they can get in touch with you about that.
Yes, so one of the clinics here in Minnesota, actually, the Dakota Family Children Clinic is the one that hosts the Two-Spirit Youth Group. The facilitators, I and the other facilitator are the ones who actually do the group, which is amazing. But you know, one thing that's really hurtful and really hurts my heart is that we had one young person attend, and after the one meeting, this person mailed back to the organizers and said, I can't attend anymore because my family won't let me. That is really sad, that a child who identifies asks for support, but because the family, you know, would not allow their child to come anymore, that's really sad. So sort of think about a lot of the discrimination, a lot of the issues that really impacts us, and our youth are our future. We need to mentor them. We need to teach them. We need to connect them with elders who identify as Two-Spirit, because we have some amazing Two-Spirit elders out there. So yes, so if anybody needs my, I'm gonna type in my email address, and if anyone is interested in wanting to find support for a young person who identifies, please email me and I could forward the information to the organizers. What I like about it too is that they're very careful and they watch who, you know, who signs up. They're very careful about who comes in the room. They're very protective, because the reality is we need to protect our young people. The group is from the age of 13 to 18. So here's my email address. I apologize, but I need to leave. So everyone, please take care.
Thank you, Lenny. And Shane, do you want to
afternoon? Yeah.
Do you want to wrap us up?
I just wanted to also say, Shane, as you're presenting to our presenters, while we are going a little bit over time, I'm sharing the slides and the resource guide that Lenny provided with us so that you will be able to access that even if you do have to leave for now. And if there are other topics you want to see like this, I'll also drop the link to the survey. So you can let us know if there's anything you want to see. Sorry, Shane, take it away.
Hey, I'm just grateful to be asked to attend and to be a part of this collective raising of consciousness. My name is Shane Ortega, or Shwent. My name is Shane Ortega. I am of Tuscarora descent. I am enrolled in the Skorora-Katanuka tribe. We're a federally status tribe that's based in North Carolina. I identify as Two-Spirit because that's the common understanding in English. However, I spent time with the Shoshone people, and out there they call me Denawa. For our own Haudenosaunee or Iroquoian speaking people, we try to say of two minds. It's a common term that we're trying to reintroduce back to the people, because the actual term for that which is me, the human being, does no longer exist because of colonization, particularly because of Catholicism wrapped up into our people. Being based in the East Coast, I don't have to give anybody the history, but it's pretty commonly known that colonization happened here first, and it's done its duty in the last 450 or so years. I identify as a mixed race Native because I'm both of European, Native, and African ancestry, and historically such have been so since, I think our family line, we go back to the 1600s. having account of that. I wanted to bring that up because at least in the Southeast, we were speaking about it a little bit before this meeting, but it creates this hierarchy of who is Indian enough based on skin hue. And that is reinforced by religiosity foundations here in the Southeast. I do want to pivot towards being a bit more hopeful and really acknowledging some of the collective things that we are all doing, reimagining our future. So the work that I personally am doing, and this isn't just centralized to the Southeast, is I work for a nonprofit organization called IDEO. We're in the design phase currently for a prototype for community-centered healthcare that is focused, my leg is intentionally focused on reparations and making that a part of community-centered healthcare initiatives, which means things like generational wealth and trust funds, collective dividends, funds for medical treatment and sovereignty, and community-based integration of traditional practitioners into the Western methodologies. Sorry, I have a stutter. I'm a retired veteran, so I'm twitchy, so we're gonna have to roll with it. But also too with that, I want to say that I also worked with IHS, particularly about their formulary, having a consistent database or area to pharmacies across Indian country, particularly urban Indian settings over the summer for our Two-Spirit people who choose to take medical interventions to have access to things like HRT or AIDS testing and things like that, and trying to create mobile clinics. That prototype should go live or launch at least in one location around February, March, as long as I get it together. But I have also worked in parallel with another organization called Folks. I don't know if anyone's on Instagram, Facebook, things like that. That is also an LGBTQ+. And I talked to them yesterday and this week too about being more Two-Spirit plus and creating systems to mail these medications, do telehealth and things like that directly with marginalized urban Indian communities. And also, of course, encompassing, Black communities too, because I'm based in the Southeast. So there are hopeful things in the works to do these things, and we can do it. We have the technology, we have all the people. And so I always want to make sure that we have balance. These statistics are incredibly important because they're real, but that collective reality is something that we can shift. And I want to make sure that we all know that we can do this. When Lenny and other folks were speaking about spiritual components and things like that, in my experience, I've had to learn to challenge it directly, which is not necessarily something that is the capacity of all, but I see it as a unique gift that Creator gave me that I can use as an example. When we were speaking about things like Sundance, I spent 3 years in the West at Fort Hall Reservation with the Shoshone people, and I will return there as well. But one of the things that I was very privileged to be included in is the Sundance Ceremony. And the particular lodge that I dance and I'm allowed with is male and has historically always been male since that it was given to them by the Lakota people. And I don't say that to boast. I say that because as a Two-Spirit person, particularly one in Western society defined as transgender, to be given that allowance even before this current time is reclaiming space. And those are the things that I would really like us as older people, older than our youth, to help create, facilitate, and make happen. Particularly like when we were talking about that center lodge pool, that's something that I got to experience and be a part of for the first time the last Sundance that I did before COVID hit. That's an incredibly powerful and great honor, but it's also my rightful place. And being an external tribal member, that's also a really huge honor to be asked to do such for a tribal nation and to be out there sort of on display for agency for all of that nation to see, because the Shoshone are a federally recognized tribe with federal benefits, and that creates a template. And so for that, I'm incredibly grateful, but I also realize the responsibility. And when Two-Spirit people are allowed to step into their responsibility and listen to facilitate that, it creates a great healing for all of the people. Because therefore, everyone that's clenching so tightly to this finite world created by colonialism that we're all boxed into can realize the power and freedom by being your authentic self unapologetically. And I think that that is so incredible and such an asset to bring to anyone. And, you know, also too, when we think about our moving forward as a people and protecting our youth, that also means, you know, I hate to use the term colonizer and people get very riled up, but settlers, colonizers, however anyone wants to describe that, have to be brought along with us. And that responsibility and that rebalancing and healing is really the foundational truth of why Two-Spirit people exist, right? We are both the light and the day. We are both this world and that world, constantly a modulation of that. And this is just our vessel in which we can interface with you. So when we think about the future, just much like Lenny was speaking to, it is as Indigenous people, as stewards of the land, with our DNA memory and what we are bringing back, Two-Spirit people are also the only people that can create new ceremony. That's said in many different nations, in many different ways. So that's also something that we should also consider because we are that balance. Does that mean that everybody can do whatever they want? No, every nation has their own protocols and how they like to do things. But I always like to bring that up because this new time demands connection. It demands a new way. Maybe it's a bit of the old and the new with good respect to both. But that reimagining is something that people who can move in that modulation can do. And with these new ceremonies, if there isn't an elder woman who has been, you know, has maybe the approval of their tribal nation or things like that in matrilineal situations, that a Two-Spirit person can step in because they can be all that is and that is not. And that is the power that we need to give to our youth, because these children are living in such a time where reality has already been transcribed. It is already going to be something else because they're not satisfied with what is now. And so, you know, with all the colonization and everything that's happening with our Two-Spirit youth, I really encourage people to, you know, if it's within your ability to respond, have things just like we're having now, a talking circle, a telephone check-in, you know, during this meeting, I burned tobacco. That's something that we do in our practice as Haudenosaunee people. We burn tobacco because we send those prayers or that heaviness up to Creator to facilitate, right? That's something innately that as a Two-Spirit person, I can do. And so I just, I really think that we are both all and nothing, right? Without each other. And so I'm just very grateful that we are talking about these things, we're talking about these considerations, and we're going to facilitate these conversations because our people, speaking to Indigenous people, have been suffering generational trauma, but also the settlers and colonizers too have been witnessing that trauma, and therefore trauma is being reflected back. And that distortion has not created an equilibrium point. And we need to do that intermediary work as Two-Spirit people. And that's all I have to say. No way. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you so much, Shane, for those words. And I really resonate with what you said around sometimes there are times that call for new ceremony, and Two-Spirits are the ones to create that because I think that's probably in some ways always been happening. And there's a book that I read recently in a Two-Spirit book club called Love After the End. And it's about sort of reimagining Indigenous futures. And it very much addresses what you were saying, Shane, around there are times where we have to fill the roles that are not able to be filled. And there are times where we have to use the knowledge that we have and still try to do things in a good way, but it's going to be something new. It's going to be something different. But that doesn't mean that it's wrong.
Because, I mean, in any tradition, and I can't speak for specific tribal nations, I can only speak to the ones which have invited me in and I've experienced. Just being honest. Okay. But the ones that have invited me in and that I've been able to experience, whether it be with the Shoshone people, whether it be with peoples in Alaska, Hawaii, or other things, is that there are always capable people that can move the power. I'll use that term, that can move the power. But the power becomes a little different when there's a two-spirit person there, because there's an intersection. It's not something that I can define in English terms or draw a picture for you necessarily, but it's different. I would say that it comes with more compassion. And that is exactly the energy that we need right now, because everything is cyclic, right? Time is not linear. And so this time is folded upon itself, and we are here in the same place of possibility and creation. And so, at least in my tradition, our matriarchs, our dreamers, and two-spirit people are the only one that can make a vision real. Whether that means by supporting somebody else who's doing great works, or by conceptualizing it ourselves and speaking the words into reality. That is what we're here to do, the weaving.
Thank you, Shane, for your words and for your inspiration today. Thank you to all of us, you really, for sharing with us that energy. As we move forward, I know we're a little bit over time, but I want to kind of give everyone an opportunity in the next few minutes to reflect on what's said. And if you do have any questions or any issues you'd like to discuss, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask any of our presenters, or put it in the chat box if you're not comfortable unmuting. And if you have any questions specifically for Lenny, their emails is in the chat box, and it will be shared after as well if you can't ask Lenny any questions since they dropped off. So if there are any specific questions for them, let us know.
Hey everyone, this is Sabu from Nikui. I appreciate all of the being vulnerable with all of us and just sharing the information that you did today. It takes a lot of courage, but it's important to let that information out and let people know. I think it's our duty now to pass this along and make sure that others know. And so breaking stigmas and decolonizing, decolonizing the approach of it being more inclusive for LGBTQI communities. Shane, I think the last part you had mentioned around like healing and bringing, I think you said like the colonizer, like this process of everyone healing, really resonates with a book I just read called Decolonizing Wealth by Edgar Villanueva. And he talks about like true healing from a perspective of everyone. Also, you have to be compassionate about those in the process of, like, he called colonizers orphans. It was something that he had mentioned because they're orphans from lands they didn't know, like they came here. So I think that really resonated with me. I like, especially since I just finished the book, so it's like really stuck in my head right now. But I appreciate you thinking about that, because it's hard sometimes for us to think about that in that way and to be compassionate. So I appreciate it.
No, thank you. I'm only one human being, and we're all in this together, we're all in the same canoe, as my uncle used to say. But even to around, like, I'll pivot to my experience in my lens, but the work with this nonprofit and blah 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 around models for reparation for care centers. I was really asked, and the people I've spoken to have asked, and everybody talks about reparations and this and that, but I really had to get to the root of the thing, which is like the financial poverty level, capitalism. It's a system that's forced upon us all. So when I think of reparations, I think about everyone affected by the federal poverty, below the federal poverty level. And then, we just had Martin Luther King Day and stuff, and I'm of African descent. And, I really looked into Dr. King, and he too said the same thing. He said, you cannot use the tools of control only in a limited form, right? Because it further marginalizes the people and reinforces oppression. You have to think the greatest good for all the people. And in my people's tradition, our oral history, we say that everyone will stand under the giant elm. Everyone. Even as traditional Haudenosaunee people, I'm an enrolled tribal member, but if I want to adopt you, if I want to adopt Emily, if I want to adopt somebody from China into my tribal nation, as long as they agree to the Great Law of Peace, if they're agreeing to the terms and the ceremonies and everything like that, they are native. We never mention adoption or anything else again. They are your people. And so with our people, I think about that all the way too, right? As the greatest stewards within my ability that I could do is to share this empathy, this depth of knowledge and love to the best of my ability with intolerance, trauma, blah, 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 with the people, because that is the weaving that we are here to do.
Thank you.
I was just going to make an observation that the chat box has some very very specific comments in it. One from Tavi regarding sharing the history of multiple genders and sexualities before European contact is important so that our peoples can understand where those discriminating and oppressive ideas came from. So modeling affirmation and having two-spirit persons hold important roles is another way of that kind of modeling. And I think that resonates well with what you were suggesting, Shane, as the way in which two-spirit persons should be in leadership roles. And I believe Lenny made the same idea when it comes to representing interventions or efforts or programs. So I think there's a great deal of agreement about that. Also wanted to observe the comment prior to that about, let's see, I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, for bringing that up. There is a question
see
from
that
Joy.
Thank you.
Joy wanted to know if there are any suggestions from the presenters on helping guide non-LGBTQ plus youth to have a greater understanding and tolerance around these issues. And they said, especially in a residential context, where these youth who are cisgender are living alongside gender nonconforming youth. So I don't know who wants to speak to that. And I also want to invite anyone who does have questions. If they don't have time, then please email me. I will put my address here and we can share them further with the presenters for you.
Like I said, I don't want to take the time hostage, but I'll just quickly say is that for non-LGBTQ youth, this is me. I can be a bit stern and I apologize, but I feel like that the education of LGBTQ youth or two-spirit youth is imperative. It is also their responsibility. I think of it in terms of human beings being accountable for each other, seeing each other on the road. We're supposed to have elevated collective consciousness. So I think it's just as important to speak to your children who are not LGBTQ and have them exposed to spaces that give allowance of LGBTQ and two-spirit youth. Because overall, it's going to make a better, well-rounded, compassionate human being. And I see that as there's nothing lost there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that, like I said, just making sure that those youth are honored and modeling that for people. I think helping people understand where ideas came from that say that there's something wrong with being LGBTQ, and really fostering this belief that we have that we're all relatives, and so we all do have a responsibility to take care of each other, and that, you know, a lot of times when I see young people being negative or putting those hateful thoughts out, you know, I always have in the back of my mind too, like, which one of this group is also LGBTQ and has so much internalized shame and hatred for themselves that this is how they're displaying it. And that's why it's also really important for all of us to make sure that we're showing in our words and our behaviors and our actions that we're affirming, because, you know, like sometimes I'll hear people say, well, our program, we don't have any LGBTQ youth here. And my answer is like, yes, you do. You just don't know yet because they don't feel comfortable saying that to you. Or maybe they haven't even realized that within themselves. And part of people being able to recognize their own identities and know things about themselves is being able to see that reflected around them. So I think doing all of those things can help, like Shane said earlier, it helps everybody, not just our two spirits or LGBTQ people.
I agree. And I think too, like my mom likes to joke that I never came out to her because she heard it from someone else and she was like, why didn't you tell me you were gay? And I was like, why should I have to tell you? Straight kids don't have to tell their parents that they're straight. So why do I have to like sit down and have a conversation with you? I was a little, you know, smart aleck, but I think that, yeah, empowering the youth to have that confidence within themselves makes a huge difference. And yeah, I think that's really interesting what you say too, Tavi, because now I'm thinking of all the times I haven't come out in a space because I don't feel safe, or like not even feeling unsafe, but like not knowing how someone's going to react. So I think that, yeah, having that affirming language, and also something that I think is so simple that can be done is like, everyone share your pronouns, even if you're cisgender, you know, like normalizing things like that so that people don't have to feel like they have to do more labor, more work to affirm their own identity, you know?
I am so here for all of that. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. And we did have one more question in the chat from Melissa, who asked if there are any task forces or projects coming up to address and provide support for Two-Spirit and LGBTQ plus youth in the urban Native communities.
Is anybody from the Portland Indian Center on the call?
I didn't see anyone.
No.
But we do have a lot of work in connections with NARA, and I know Shane was on the call. So they're in that area.
Yeah, I know that the Portland area Indian Center does a lot of work for Two-Spirit and LGBTQ Native youth, and you can sign up to get text messages from them, and so they'll send out, like, if they're having support groups for youth, or if there's different events going on online that you can join. Sometimes they just send out little positive statements or videos or things like that. So that's something that I know of. Shane or Somáh, do y'all want to share anything?
Okay, I was trying to be respectful. Like I like to talk, but I don't want to take up the whole time. I really just feel like at this time, just because of the virus and everything that's going on, it's just I would really ask who you feel called to ask what they need. Because everything is in such flux and modulation in this reality right now that the easiest way to do any sort of outward work is to just really see who wants what they need. Because people, unfortunately, at this time, with everything in the world, people have to ask, whether it be an informal or formal ask, it has to be done, even if you're approaching them first. So like a youth group that's local, or even your urban Indian center that's local, I would really start the line of questioning there and see like how you can be utilized. I know that it's not a finite answer, and I know that it's more comforting to have a finite answer. But quite frankly, I've always experienced is like any community that I'm in, I'll be there. I'll learn the rules, the protocols. I'll become part of the culture. I'll do whatever is necessary in order for me to be more approachable. So inward work before outward work. And then I'll ask what I can do for you to return the gratitude. And so that's usually how it organically develops, at least in my experience. So I always really encourage people, whether it's distributing coats or toys or anything like that, to, just ask the people what they need. It might just be like, hey, we need you to go buy cans of soup and drop them off, at a local shelter. Or if you see a homeless youth on the streets in your area and it's got indigenous homeless youth populations, maybe doing that extra work of really asking that person, hey, what's going on in your situation? And that might be enough. I'm not a man of grand gestures, not normally, but some of the best work that I think I ever do is maybe just saying, hey, how are you really doing? How is your day really going? A small conversation.
I saw a quote the other day, speaking to what you said, Shane. I saw a quote the other day that said, mutual aid is where we practice the world we want to live in. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately too. Like, right, it doesn't always have to be a grand gesture. It can just be, and I think those small things, doing those small things is what makes it a regular practice, right? And yeah, that's very valuable. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. I love that. You shared so many projects before that you're all working on to help with this, but just that reminder that we can do little things every day to help. Like, even if it's like a little bit extra is important to remember. And I just wanted to add, Tavi, if you have that Portland info, and I don't know if you can share it in the chat right now, but if you have it, you can send it to me and I can send it out to everybody. Since it looks like some of the Portland folks are looking for it. Thank you. I think we're going to conclude. So I just want to thank all of our amazing presenters for sharing, but really also to our participants for creating like a welcoming environment. Really, you made the topic of the presentation come true by your participation, your questions, and your respect. So thank you. As we move forward, if we go to the next slide, I just want to let everyone know that if they do want to join in any of these other mental wellness series, we will have another one coming up soon. It's a similar style conversation, and it will be on understanding suicide and substance misuse among urban Native youth on February 16th. And we'll have a series on clinical accreditation coming up at some point too. And as you can probably see in the chat, my colleague Mark our program manager has dropped our SurveyMonkey link. So if you want to just tell our presenters how awesome they were and thank them. And if you want to see any other topics like this, or, let's go into colonization more, then we might even invite Shane and Somáh, Tavi, and Lenny back. I think we'll have to, because it sounds like they have a lot more to say. So thank you to everybody. I will lend you back the rest of your afternoon. Thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.